heart rate variability is a really important metric that a lot of people don't understand. And the key behind it and why it's helpful to look at is that it's showing basically how can our body respond to threats and how can it also decompress and relax. So the larger that number is, the better. So if there is a threat or we're exercising and our heart gets really high, we want it to be able to respond and do that in a healthy way. But we also want it to completely be able to relax and decompress. We don't want to go from boiling to simmering.
I see that number all the time, and I thought it was like an indicator of either your exhaustion or how, like, if you're about ready to get sick and you don't know that you're sick and it's coming on. Is there any correlation there?
Well, if your body and your brain are under stress and threat for whatever reason, then the heart rate variability range is going to start shrinking because your body's not and your brain aren't going to completely let you get to full resting. It's kind of like going from the boiling kettle to simmering instead of really turning the burner off, because that extra hypervigilance, think about for people in certain circumstances where, okay, there's this ongoing stress and they never can really fully decompress. That's why we see that for a lot of people that they carry so much tension in their bodies and don't realize it. And what happens is our brain is constantly scanning to check and look to see if there's any indicator of a threat because it wants to protect us. It wants us to survive. So if our muscles are tense, if our heart's beating faster, if we're breathing faster, think of that fight or flight response. Right. That's our body preparing to protect itself. So if our heart rate is much higher and we're not having that variability and it can't fully relax, then our body is going to be on edge. And if you're running at higher RPMs for a long time, that you are going to be more likely to burn out and to feel sick and to a lot of those things as well, because that puts more stress and strain on the system. So that's kind of where, from the wearable standpoint. Now, I personally like to see people use the wearables that don't have the screens on them because, and that's where if we can talk for a moment about the not so helpful aspects of technology. So is that light is one of the biggest things that disrupt our sleep. So it's great when we have a lot of light, it tells our brain to be awake. So our optic nerve perceives light, sends messages to this little part of the brain, we'll call it the sleep switch. It says it's light out, the sun is out, be awake. It's dark out, be asleep.
So I just want to throw in
yeah.
for my parents at home.
Yeah.
So the TV does not help you sleep. Is that correct?
I mean, parent, particular parent who swears that the TV is mandatory for helping you sleep. And there are studies on this. Just can't cite them.
So here's the thing with the TV.
She's being nice.
And it is, well,
it worked in college.
What I've learned is if I just say no, it doesn't help, people aren't exactly going to follow it. But if I explain to them why it doesn't help, then they at least have the reasoning behind it and can do what they want to do with their own due diligence.
Perfect.
What we know, there's a couple reasons with that. So in general, we talked about how we go throughout the day. Our brains are designed to process information. They need the chance to do that. But for most of us, we don't give it the chance. And then we crawl in bed. It's time to go to sleep. We're alone with our thoughts. And our brain is running and racing. And it could be mundane things, planning the next day. This is my grocery list. This is where I need to go. This is what I have to do. It doesn't always mean that it just has to be worrying, but our brain just does the processing that we didn't let it do throughout the day. You keep ignoring your computer, you eventually turn it off, and now all the updates are running in the background because you haven't been letting it do it. That's what your brain starts to do when you get in bed. So now we're listening to the podcast. We're doom scrolling on our technology. We're watching TV because it's distracting our brain just enough so that we can fall asleep. What we should actually be doing is, and I'll talk about this in a moment, are certain strategies to shut the brain off and let it process. And I always say, I can promise you that your great-grandparents didn't need that episode or that podcast to fall asleep because it did not exist. But we've become dependent on it. And part of that is because we no longer have set our other sleep triggers. Think about for kids. You have a whole bedtime process. Mm-hmm. You're going to have bath time and wash your face and brush your teeth and read a story or say your prayers or whatever it is. And that helps them to prepare and know it's time for sleep. We don't do that as adults. We just go now.
Then you're on Twitter.
Right. And now it's this
video
to this video.
Okay, the kids are in bed. Now we can go back to real life.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's what happens for so many people.
Yeah.
So part of it is, but here's the thing, talk about TV. Have you ever noticed that the commercials are louder than the regular programming?
Yeah.
So not only is the light an issue, and that's what we're talking, like the bright light tells our brain to be awake, but you're starting to fall asleep and that volume change wakes you back up again. Or, okay, well, fine, I'm not going to have the TV on. I'm just going to listen to something. Well, as you're falling asleep and your brain is processing and checking for threats, it's going to say, wait a minute, I don't recognize his voice. He's not supposed to be in bed with me. Who is this person? And it will cause these little micro awakenings where you don't even realize that you're waking up, but it's pulling you out of restorative sleep and you're hovering in that light sleep because it's trying to make sure that there's nothing that's going to injure you. So that's where our light in general can delay. I mean, there's studies looking at adolescents that it can delay their ability to fall asleep by up to 2 hours by being on screens.
Yeah.
And so that's also why we see so many people with melatonin deficiencies. Because it used to be that when it would start to get dark and the sun would set, that change in light triggered our bodies to produce melatonin. Well, now we have these bright screens in front of us, and our brain never knows when it's time to actually start to prepare for sleep. So I'll ask you this. If you are crawling into bed and it's ready to go, time to go to sleep, why do you need to check your email? If you're not going to respond to it the next day, why do you have to see what's in your inbox?
What if you're going to go ahead and respond to now?
Then we should be doing that outside of bed, right? But
Yeah.
that's what happens. That's the last thing that people check and do, and then their brain is waking up instead of decompressing and winding down. Or sleeping with our phones under our pillows not close to us. Put your phones in do not disturb mode.
This is the downside. I mean, totally different stuff of constant contact of technology, and it gives. I mean, for people who are busy and doing things, that's us. That's our clients. Is you're always planning the next thing. The anxiety of not responding, the anxiety of not planning out what you're doing tomorrow. So, but you have access to it. Where, like you said, 100 years ago, people didn't. You just went to bed because that was all there was, and you see them in the morning.
Yeah. And so what's happening now is all of these devices. So think about the watches, to get back to that for a second. They're great, but if you don't put them in do not disturb mode, your head's laying on your arm, all those flashes are going off throughout the night.
Yeah.
When your eyelids are closed, you can still perceive light changes.
Sure.
So now all those flashes, and that's what happens. So part of it too is when you wake up in the middle of the night, you don't have to check your phone. You're not going to send an eloquent email at 3 a.m. It doesn't matter what somebody tweeted. And what ends up happening is it wakes your brain back up if you were asleep. But I mean, if we're honest,
Someone's
right?
wrong on the internet. You got to attack them.
But then now you're up for all this time. It's disrupting your sleep. But here's the other thing. When you check your phones, for us, many times we also are then checking the clock. When you wake up in the middle of the night, it does not matter what time it is. Don't check the clock. Your brain is going to immediately start calculating.
Anxiety.
Yeah, but the thing about it, you're going to think, okay, well, I've been asleep for 3 hours. Am I going to fall back to sleep? I have to be up in 45 minutes. Should I try to fall back to sleep? Oh my gosh, it's 3 a.m. again. I'm up at 3 a.m., which we can talk about why that is. But it's better to not look at it. If your alarm hasn't gone off, if you roll over, you're actually more likely to fall back to sleep and get more restful sleep than all that anxiety kicking in. You don't need the clock displayed on the ceiling above your bed.
Guilty. You're probably going to get into this, but that's where I was curious is to kind of, for those of us that have things wrong in the room, or setting up the room, or giving us the best chance for good sleep, if you can talk a little bit about just almost like staging, in the sense, like I'm thinking right now as you're speaking, as we see
adult bedtime routine.
what kind of, like, because I'm just thinking
Take
of
the
little
TV
things
out
like,
of the room.
like little, well,
Well,
you
she
know,
already said,
we don't watch TV,
don't get in bed until you're ready to go to sleep.
but just like
No
light.
TV in the room?
Okay, so like we've got a lamp
That's
in
crazy.
the hallway. It's not in our room, but there is light that you can see ambient light coming down. So, and I've heard things about like kids not having night lights and things like that. So just try to black out the room entirely. You were talking before with us about temperature. And so if you can talk a little bit about just, preparation.
But I was just eager to buy a bigger TV for the room.
But when are you
I already
going to
blew that
watch it
one.
if you're not watching it in bed?
Yeah, that's a problem.
So I will say this. Take like college students, for instance, or I do have some individuals when they move into other more assisted living spaces and such where their bed may be the only thing to sit on.
Mhm.
If that's the practical case, then what we want them to do is either sit at the edge of the bed, treat it more like a couch, or at least sit on top of the covers. So then that way there's still something triggering when is it time to go to bed, where I turn off the TV, I put the book down, I climb under the covers, and I still have something to indicate and trigger now is the time to sleep. Now, for the bedroom environment in general, we know that we want it to be cold enough that we need a cover. That specific temperature varies for lots of different reasons, but we want it cold enough that you need a cover. You want it to be quiet, so you don't have all the volume changes. Even listening to classical music, you have the crescendos and the decrescendos and volume changes. If you need noise, fine, but have it be static noise, a fan, a white noise machine, those things. So cold, dark, quiet, and comfortable. Eye masks are fine. Earplugs are great. Not everybody can do that. You need to hear the kiddos or whatever it is. But those devices can work. But eye masks can be a great option. If you're traveling in a hotel, the little clip hangers that are in the closet, use those to clip the curtains together so less light can come through. All kinds of little things you can do with that to help to reduce that. Put the towel under the door so the light isn't coming in and the sound. We'll talk about those pieces. But that a big part of it is really creating that environment that's conducive to sleep. And so when we're getting up in the middle of the night, you don't have to turn on all the lights. That's where you can have, for instance, the motion sensor night lights that when you walk, it lights up, but it's not light the rest of the time. We don't want you to trip and fall and injure yourself on the way to the restroom, but you don't need them on the whole night type of thing.
And finally, we'd like to thank Amundi Pioneer for sponsoring this podcast and our time with Dr. Milanak.